Hey guys, it's Jack. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my very first video, so before I even get started, I do want to just say a big thank you to anyone that is watching. Um, this has been something I've always wanted to do, but I've just never quite had the balls to do it because it's you're putting yourself out there, and people, the whole world can see you. So I want to talk a little bit about what this YouTube channel is going to be, and I'm also going to give you a little story as to what kind of inspired me to start this. So why don't we start with the story first? Okay, it might make a bit more sense. So I am a type 1 diabetic. Okay, so to give you a rough idea of what that actually means is essentially, in layman's terms, the body is sent a signal to the cells of my pancreas which have ceased production of insulin. Type 1 diabetes has nothing to do with genetic disposition, lifestyle, how overweight you are. Okay, it's completely autoimmune. So I do get a lot of questions about, oh, did you eat too much sugar as a kid and stuff like that. So just want to clear the air there. So look, I grew up a very healthy kid. Was very outdoorsy. I was always on my bike with my mates, always skateboarding and all that kind of good stuff. And it was around 14 years ago that I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. All right. So I was 13, actually. So let me take you back there. It was longer than that now. But anyway, we'll get back to that. So I was 13 years old, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It was the school holidays, and I was out riding my bikes with my mates from school, and I just noticed on this particular day that it was a real hot day, and I remember just feeling really weak, and my vision started to get a little bit blurry. Didn't really think anything of it as a kid. You don't really. You just kind of push on through, and away you go. It was over a Christmas period, and there was about 6 weeks there where I got increasingly sick quite quickly. And it started off with your symptoms that you probably Googled before, but it's frequent urination, frequent thirst, always tired, rapid weight loss. And as a young kid, I was already very skinny as it was. I was below 50 kilos, so it happened over about 6 weeks, and I remember I used to start getting cramps down the right side of my body. My whole leg would lock up in my sleep, and my stomach would cramp. My ribs would cramp up, and this was getting worse and worse by week. And I hadn't really said too much to my parents. I kind of just thought it was growing pains, and stuff like that. And being so young at the time, you're not really expecting to get ill, right? And I was out camping with a friend of mine, and I remember just getting this excruciating cramping in my legs and getting up throughout the whole night to go and piss on the tree outside. And it was at that moment that I started to really feel quite unwell. I went home, and when I was home for about 3 or 4 days before I went to hospital. And I remember drinking liters and liters and liters of soft drink, which you can only imagine would make the problem even worse, right? With your blood sugar just going up. And all I could do was just sleep. And there were days there, my mum and dad were tracking this, and I would just sleep all day, and I'd only get up to urinate and get up to drink and then go back to sleep. Finally, obviously, as you can imagine, my mother was very worried and took me to the doctors, and one finger prick glucose check, they were able to confirm that I was a type 1 diabetic. So from there, they sent me off to a pathology clinic, and where they drew the blood out, and then from there I went straight to a specialist. So it was quite a traumatic day, as you can imagine. At the age of 13, your whole life was just swapped around like that. And I remember getting to the specialist and basically passing out at this point. I don't really remember what he was saying, but I do vaguely remember kind of crossing the crossing the road, and my dad having to really hold me up as we were crossing the road to go into the hospital. And my specialist said something, I'll never forget this, and he said, my mum said, "Oh, okay, so do we take our son home now? Like, what do we do?" And he goes, "No, you go to hospital." And it was like, I heard that, and I remember seeing my mum's face, and seeing my dad's face, and my sister being, like, this is quite scary. So we went to hospital, and I never forget, I had a nurse, and he looked like Lenny Kravitz. He had a big afro, and he was real cool, calm, collected. And by this point, I was struggling to stand on my own. They had me in a wheelchair, and they wheeled me into the hospital, and they did all the checks and whatnot. And they administered me on a bed. And I remember they came out and they said, "We're going to administer you some insulin." And sure enough, they shot an insulin, and then off I went. Right, and I was asleep. I was so tired. And the pathology clinic that night actually called my parents, very, very scared, and said, like, urgently calling my parents midnight. And they said, "Is your son in hospital?" And they went, "Yes." And apparently the nurse on the other side was relieved, because she hadn't seen glucose levels so high before. So I don't know if that's a record I'm necessarily proud of, but I'll take it. So I'm at this point now in the hospital. They keep me in hospital for, I think it was about 2 weeks. And every day I'm starting to feel better and better. And keep in mind, my blood sugars were still averaging around 20, and I felt great. So it only gives you an idea as to how high that really is. For the Americans watching this, I'm not really too sure what that works out to be, but I know you guys work out on a different system. But it was high, and I I didn't really kind of come to terms with it in the hospital, because you're looked after, right? You don't really think for yourself. And they had all these diabetic educators come in, and even then I found it quite hard to relate, because they were a lot older, and they weren't necessarily the role models that I was kind of looking for. Um, and then they sent me home, and I remember that they sent me home over the Christmas holidays, and I was just set to start high school that year. So there's a lot going on. 13, beginning of puberty, type 1 diabetic, you've missed your school holidays, like, it's a bit of a shit show. And I remember being at home, it was probably about a weekend, and I remember my mum walked in, and she just said, "Oh, how you going?" And I never forget it. I just broke down crying, just broken. And keep in mind, at the age of 13, that's your whole life. It's kind of fallen down, right? Like, I was very fortunate that I had a good upbringing with my mum and dad, and I still consider my parents my best friends. And I remember just breaking down completely, just being so upset that this was my life now, you know. And not only that, but being told, like, you've got to control it, otherwise the potential for this and this could happen, right? Very scary stuff. And it really did change my life forever. I remember going to school and being very embarrassed, because the school was trying to make me go down to the sick bay every lunch break. So morning tea and lunch break, they try to make me go down there to do my injections. And I'm already feeling like an outcast. Like, I don't need any more any more backing on that. And fortunately, I had a good group of mates at school, and we would all sit down with our sandwiches and stuff like that, and I'd say, "All right, boys, keep a lookout for teachers," and I'll do my needle, and I'd do my needle, and they were really cool like that. They were really cool like that. And so, fast forward a few months go by, and I opted myself to go onto the insulin pump, which is this one here. Okay. Um, and believe me, again, this is my biased opinion on it, but the insulin pump has been tremendous. It's the best thing ever, right? Allows that flexibility. I could, pull it out mid class, do my numbers. It was fantastic. So fortunate to be in that era of technology where there's constant improvement, right? Now, sometimes people ask me, oh, are you hopeful for a cure? And this is where I can sound a little bit pessimistic, but the reality is I don't believe that there'll ever be a cure, because the amount of money each year that these pharmaceutical companies make out of people like myself is staggering. So ask yourself the age-old question, right? Why would you stop a cash ball coming in for a potential one-off transaction when you can have repeat customer for the entirety of their life? Again, that's my thinking. I'd love to obviously see some studies and see some improvement in that space, but unfortunately, I just believe that while Big Pharma's got a hold of it, they won't let it go. So back to where I was at. So I was in high school, and life was challenging as it was, and I managed to kind of keep pressing through and doing what I needed to do, and just kind of getting by and managing. It played a pretty heavy mental toll on me, and I think that did stick with me, even right through till now. Um, but I also am at a point now where I can't imagine life without it. Um, and I always tried to challenge it as much as I could. And I remember I was in high school, and at the time, around year 11, year 12, the guys started getting to the gym. It was pretty common, worldwide. Young guys start going to the gym and start getting in shape. And I was only a scrawny kid, a bit of a musician kid, and just bit nerdy, bit geeky, just kind of ran his own race, And I've always been curious and interested about bodybuilding, but was just too scared to kind of start, I never forget this one day. This kid said to me, and he goes, "Oh, you're diabetic. You'll never put on muscle," And I thought, well, I'll fucking show you. And I went to the gym, and my starting weight was 57 kilos. And I just had some buddies from school. They came through and they showed me the ropes, And now I look back on it, it's probably the wrong approach, because I went in there and just absolutely destroyed my body on that first week. I could barely move. But it was a feeling to know that what I had trained was now in progress of changing. Meaning it was growing, and it gave me something positive to focus on. And not only that, but what it did for my mental space, leaving the gym after, I had never felt anything like it. Never felt anything like it. I was able to go to the gym, work out, put my heavy metal in, deal with the demons up here, but be rewarded with these health benefits and better insulin sensitivity, and naturally I just started to learn about it. I learn about food, and learn about training and sleep, and how important these things are. And I started getting Arnold Schwarzenegger's big encyclopedia of bodybuilding for Christmas, and it really was just something that I really fell in love with. And then I decided to keep pushing and keep pushing a little bit further. And I'd been training in the gym for about 2 years. And in this 2-year period, I'd put on about 25 kilos of just lean muscle. I was just lean. Okay. Again, some newbie gains there. Your body's very responsive at that age, especially, to be growing. But I started seeing these guys get up on stage. I thought, gee, that'd be pretty cool, And I blindly just went, you know what, let's do it. And there was a coach at my local gym, and I said, yeah, you know what, let's have a go. And I was never the biggest, and I'm still not now the biggest, but I do have the ability of getting very lean, very conditioned. And I love that conditioning. I love being lean and pushing the body in that element. So I signed up for it, We did about a 24-week prep, where, excuse me, I just closed that window. Where, there was a portion of that time that was put into putting muscle on, and then there was a portion of that time put into, leaning up. As you can imagine, leaning up for me wasn't really a hard part. I was very fortunate in that regard. And we can talk a little bit about later on about why that is the case. So I went on to do my first show where I got fourth in the junior fitness model competition, which is kind of like a physique show, bodybuilding show, but the guys are a lot smaller and the posing is a little bit different. And to be honest, I don't even know if the category exists anymore. And then a year later, I went to do my second show and got third in the opens. And so third in my junior division and then fourth in the opens. So still have the trophies here. And then I eventually turned that into a blossoming career, which I've done really well at and all that kind of good stuff. But I did need to make some changes to be able to financially move forward in life. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, even though I stepped away from the industry, and I've probably collectively had about a year off training since I kind of started. Last year, working in the corporate side of things really derailed me a lot, and it put me in perspective of the everyday person, the person that has to get up, go to work, look after their family, and do things. And it allowed me to look at it from a different light and go, well, how do we do this without being so extreme on the other side? Because like I said, I've done it, and I've done it multiple times. And as you can imagine, I have a mortgage and I have a job to go to and I've got responsibilities that need to be met. Yet here we are, 55 days in. My starting weight was 101 kilos and we're down to 93 kilos. Old habits die hard, right? Now, I've had to change a lot of things regarding my approach and to be more flexible around certain areas that, that allow for your body to change. Now, I know I kind of briefed over a lot of that kind of type 1 diabetic story, but I hope it kind of makes sense as to how it kind of came to be. Everyone's life is pretty complex, including mine. I've had a lot of challenges along the way that have definitely been hard. But what I want to do with this channel is I want to share my insight, and I want to show not just the everyday person, but also the type 1 diabetics that you can get in peak condition, ready for a show. There is no stopping you. There is whatever belief system you have about that in your head, throw it in the bin. And I can promise you, it's hard. Don't get me wrong, it's hard. But it's hard just for the average person to do it as well. And I think that's important to remember, is that we do have some key areas that we can really work with that will actually make you more aware of your body, and you'll start reaping the benefits out of it, right? What you do today defines your result tomorrow, that kind of thing. It's a ripple effect, compounding effect. I've been very fortunate that my insulin ratio hasn't really changed in the last 10 years, and it's for a primary reason in that. And that's because I've managed to always look after myself, apart from that last year, I will be honest. But it's not as hard as what you might think. And I understand, as a type 1 diabetic, it's very easy to feel lonely. And it's definitely something that I've battled with. Even though I've got beautiful people around me, it's hard. It's hard being a type 1 diabetic. It's fucking hard. So, again, I'm sorry if I'm blabbing on a little bit too much on this, but direction of the channel, I just want to be transparent. I want to tell you guys what I get up to. I want to tell you guys my little tips and tricks along the way to kind of allow you to sustain a healthy approach to all of this. And then, again, I can cater for those extreme scenarios. If anyone's got questions, or they're really not too sure, feel free to ask. I know there's people out there probably more qualified in this sector, but I also know for a fact what it's like to do it myself. What it's like to cut weight, what it's like to put muscle on, what it's like to be eating in a calorie surplus, a calorie deficit, all these things, what it's like to mitigate high blood sugars on stressful days, all of it. So again, thank you so much for listening to my first little story. And I'm going to check back in a week and do another video. And again, it might be training, might be some nutrition stuff. We'll get fancy with it. We'll play around with it. But again, thank you so much for listening, and see you on the next one.